Hi everybody, welcome to day 6 of Steph's Take live stream series where I feature concepts from 2 books through the lens of the accountability evangelist. Today we're featuring Brain Rules by John Medina. I think it's Medina. Sometimes I'm worried I'm misspelling or mispronouncing the author's name, so sorry about that if I am. But from John, and The Myth of Multitasking by Dave Crenshaw. Trying to hold that steady because I know sometimes the video quality is a little choppy. So we're going to start with brain rules. And first I'll just tell you right off the bat a couple things that you'll learn if you decide to read this book. You're not going to be surprised by them, but there's a good reason for that. Repetition is probably a sign that something good is going on. For example, exercise and sleep are really good for your brain. I know that's not revolutionary, but almost everything I've read has suggested that, and still people resist. There are other reasons for that. We're not going to talk about that today, but I did want to point out that he does spend a good amount of time discussing those 2 topics. The difference is that he does back it up with quite a bit of research. So if you're a research type of person and you would like evidence, it's probably a good choice for you. A couple things that I noticed that are a little less obvious. One is that it makes a difference who's actually communicating. So in terms of learning and performance, if you're trying to do a good job, it matters who's talking to you. So we'll start with the first quote I'm going to feature today on that topic. If someone does not feel safe with a teacher or boss, he or she may not be able to perform as well. If a student feels misunderstood because the teacher cannot connect with the way the student learns, the student may become isolated. So all you teachers out there, and again, just like with the term leader, when I say teacher, I'm speaking to it broadly, but of course, directly to those who are actually teachers. Keep that in mind. You have so much power to lift up a child and the power to hold them back. So you really need to meet the person where they are. As an adult learner, you need that as well. So I consider myself a teacher for adults. That's not ever been in my job description or title, I should say, but I've done a lot of teaching over the years in leadership development, and I have found that to be true. You have to meet them where they are. They don't always understand all the concepts right away. They may be distracted by other things that are more important to them or a higher priority, such as things like, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to feed my family? It's kind of hard to learn when you're distracted like that. So you really have to keep that in mind. You can't just keep shoving learning on somebody and assuming that the more you tell them, the more they're going to be able to digest. It's actually the opposite. And John talks about that as well. So I'm going to feature the next quote on that topic and then talk a little bit more about it. The most common communication mistakes: relating too much information with not enough time devoted to connecting the dots. Lots of force feeding, very little digestion. This does nothing for the nourishment of the listeners, whose learning is often sacrificed in the name of expediency. Most experts are so familiar with their topic that they forget what it's like to be a novice. Even if they remember, experts can become bored with having to repeat the fundamentals over and over again. So I can speak to that directly in that my accountability research and developing of content, I've said the same things over and over hundreds of times, and I have to keep reminding myself when I'm speaking to a new audience, such as maybe some of you listening today, you may never have heard this before. If it's the first time you've heard it, it may be revolutionary to you. Or maybe it's the second or third time you've heard it, but it hasn't sunk in yet. So I've been trying to make a conscious effort, actually with this live stream series as well, to not cram a ton of information in. Although it seems like I still am, because I'm so excited about these books that I want to tell you all about them. But really, look at this book. I don't know if you can see this well the way I'm turning it, but this is a super thick book. You know, this is, I don't know how many pages this thing is, but it's quite long, and it's 280 something pages. There's no way for me to do that in like 5 to 7 minutes and do it justice. So I'm just highlighting some of the concepts to whet your appetite so that you might want to look further into the concepts and possibly even read the book. So that's something that I do. The other thing I've done in my leadership development series that I've done in the past for companies is I come back every couple weeks and I teach a new topic, but I start off with saying, let's review what we learned last time, to remind people the concept. So in doing that, you kind of learn it twice, and then you layer on something else. So that supports what John is saying in the book. The other thing he says that I like, was pretty pumped to hear, not surprised, is that we are indeed lifelong learners. Our brain content, our brain structure, excuse me, probably better to say structure. Our brain structure supports that we can learn forever. Parts of our brain are actually just as malleable as a newborn's, which means we can learn forever, and really that's the best way to keep your brain healthy, in addition to, of course, exercise and sleep and eating well. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about with brain rules today has to do with multitasking. So this is what John says about that. The best you can say is that people who appear to be good at multitasking actually have good working memories, capable of paying attention to several inputs, one at a time. So he's making the case, as many people have, that you really can't multitask, literally can't multitask. You cannot do two things at once, meaning you can't pay attention to two things at the same time. And so that's a great segue into our second book, again, The Myth of Multitasking. I'll hold that up for you. I'm actually not going to quote from this book because the book is actually written as a story. So it has characters in it, and as you go through each of the chapters, the characters are learning about multitasking and how it doesn't really work. So it's actually a really quick read. I mean, compared to the other book, you see how thin this is. You could certainly do this book in one sitting if you were so interested. So again, not going to quote directly, but I do want to cover some of the key concepts. Again, Dave Crenshaw agrees with Medina. You can't do two things at once. It's not effective. So, okay, so what? All right, what are we left with? No options? I mean, we can't just distinctly do one thing at a time. There's so much to do, right? So one of the solutions that he gives is something a lot of you probably already do and don't realize it, and he calls it background tasking. So that's different from switch tasking, which is really what you probably think about when you think about multitasking. I'll get to switch tasking in a second. But first, for background tasking, this is actually really helpful, and I use this all the time. And I can tell you that I'm trying to teach my children to do it too, because it drives me nuts when they're sitting there waiting for something to be done before they start something else. For example, you can run a load of laundry while you're doing something else. That's background tasking, right? The laundry is going, and you can work on another chore, you could read a book, you could do something else, right? So that is not a distraction to you. It's happening in the background, and that's how you can get two things done at once. Another example is, I'll stick with the laundry because that's my studio location, and I happen to spend a lot of time in here. That's why I decorated it so nicely with my Disney motif. So I often like to take my phone calls when I'm folding laundry, because I'm not, loving folding laundry. It's not my favorite thing to do. I don't hate it, but it seems kind of wasteful to just sit in there and fold laundry. So I like to take phone calls, or maybe listen to a podcast, or do something else while I'm doing this activity that is just kind of second nature to me now. I really don't have to focus very much on how to fold a shirt. So I can listen intently to somebody in a phone conversation, whereas in other cases, if I'm trying to do other things while I'm on the phone, I might not be as present with them. So I highly recommend that you try that. All right, so let me go to switch tasking. So according to Dave Crenshaw, there are two types of switch tasking. One is active switching, and the other is passive. So active is when you decide to do something else. So you're working on, you're writing an email or something, and you decide, oh, hold on, I got to do this, or I want to look at this other email, or I'm going to flip over to my internet browser. You're making the choice to do that, right? So he's advising to stop that as much as possible, because that's what you have control over. All right, that's a habit that is really hard to break, but the more that you can do that, the more you're actually going to get done, because your focus and attention is more efficient when you're focusing on one thing at a time. Now, the other type of switch tasking is passive switching, which is more like interruptions or things that come at you without your immediate choice. So could be somebody interrupting you, or it could be something interrupting you. So what can you do about that? So I'm going to give you a couple tips that I have done. First, for my email, I've turned off my email alerts. There is a way, if you have Outlook, for example, that's what I use at work, you can have the whole email pop up with like a little piece of the subject in it, or even part of the email. A lot of people have that on. I think it might actually be the default. You can turn that off. I have turned it off, and instead I just let the little envelope icon in the tray appear, so I know there's an email there, but I don't know what it is. Honestly, that's not 100% effective because I'm still lured into wanting to click on it to see what it is. So at some point I might undo the envelope icon. But the reason I like the envelope icon is because if there isn't an icon there and I'm working on something else, and let's say I'm waiting for an email, I don't have to keep flipping back and forth to my Outlook to see if an email came in. The envelope icon on the bottom of my tray will tell me that it's there. So it's, it depends on how you want to use the strategy, but that's the one I recommend, and that's the one that's worked for me. The other thing I do is I do not use the native email application on my cell phone. So I have an iPhone. I get my email through that, but I get my personal email through it. I don't get my primary job, my full-time job, I don't put my email there because I want to decide when I'm going to engage in my primary job after hours. So I use the Outlook app for that. That means I can always access it, but again, I have the notifications disabled, so they don't pop up and distract me when I'm having dinner with my family or I'm doing some other things. However, my team has been trained, my colleagues know that they can always reach me. If they have an urgent email that they need me to see after hours or on the weekends or whatever, I'm happy to attend to it. But I'm not going to keep checking, and I'm not going to have alerts. So I just simply ask that they send me a text message or call me and say, hey, I need you to look at this. And I've been doing this for years. So for you skeptics who are like, yeah, right, like they're going to honor that, I have been doing it for years and over multiple companies. Okay, it doesn't take long to set that standard, and people will follow it. Even if they don't adopt it themselves, which of course I highly recommend, they will respect that you're doing that. The other way I teach people to minimize interruptions, or at least minimize my interruptions, in my last company, when I had an office with a door, I put a sign on the door whenever it was closed. Okay, so let me just pause there and say, I didn't close my door very often. I only closed it when it needed to be closed, and there were only 3 reasons why it needed to be closed. I'm going to tell you those in a second, but I just want to point out that the only reason this actually worked really well is because I had my door open at all other times. So you can't close your door most of the time and expect people not to knock if you're never available. So I would consciously get up from my chair. If I was on a phone call, let's say, a phone meeting, and my door was closed, as soon as the phone call ended, I hung up, get up, open my door. So people know I'm available. So when I'm not available, there are 3 reasons why I'm not available. 1, out of the office, which is somewhat obvious, but that way they don't have to keep knocking and waiting and kind of wondering if I'm in the office or not. I have this little Velcro piece of, little tiny piece of Velcro with a Velcroed sign that's laminated that says out of office right near my door handle. And so they know I'm not there, so they don't bother. Okay, the other reason is if I'm in a meeting, right, with someone and I don't want to be disturbed, I have in a meeting. Again, self-explanatory. The last one I used is working in quadrant 2. So those are things that I'm working on that are important but not urgent. We are going to talk about that tomorrow, and I'm very excited to do that when we talk about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. So I'm going to just leave it there and not explain quadrant 2 anymore, just to say in this context that that was a way I used to minimize interruptions. So you have to pair it with being available as much as possible, and then when you're not available, having a legitimate reason for not being available so that you can focus. Because again, just to bring the 2 themes together, the theme of the 2 books today, that's the parallel theme, is multitasking really doesn't work. So you have to actually employ some alternate strategies to make the most of your time. Okay, that's it for now. See you next time.